Standards on social media continue to degrade. I'm Marco Perry. Welcome to the Perry Platform. Like many of you, I've been using social media for quite some time, and there's been one very common trend I've noticed. I'm sure you can relate to this. Things just keep getting dumber and dumber. There are examples at the institutional level, at the individual level, and even at the business level. And I'll try to give an example of each of those in a moment, but for whatever reason, these categories of user type have prioritized social media credit over things like professionalism and decency, and they're doing this to the detriment of their legitimacy. These detriments come in many different forms and they depend on the situation and the particular user type, but there's no shortage of this occurring. When we look at the institutional level, it's just astounding to me how many of these institutions have been captured on social media. You can even look at the White House Twitter account for a great example of this. This is a building we're talking about, and not just any building. It's the building that hosts some of the most powerful politicians in the world, including the president, the vice president, and many others of America. Now, while these politicians will change, the president will not be there forever, neither will the vice president or anyone else for that matter. The White House is a symbol of something that will remain. It should be a symbol that acts as a unity figure for Americans, something that people can rally behind. If an individual politician wants to get into a fight with another, as we'll talk about in a little bit, that's fine. That's their prerogative. But to leverage the White House Twitter in the ways I've been seeing lately, which is to start dogfights between Republicans and Democrats, is just absurd. What good do we think is going to come from that? What good do we think driving partisan polarization into an institution like this is going to produce? As of late, we've had the White House getting very snippy and producing content with an attitude, in particular defending America's most recent move to forgive some proportion of student debt. And how they illustrated this and how they went about their offensive campaign was to single out popular Republicans who received PPP loan forgiveness, and that's in relation to the pandemic. It wasn't a student loan, if I recall correctly. These were business loans. Now, this of course created much tension, and coming from the White House, a symbol that should be one of unification, this is just absurd to me. Why even go there? Why turn this into a partisan tool? Well, the answer is in some part obvious. Because the ruling party can use that to bolster their followership, to alienate the opposition, to make them look bad. But should we be thinking so short-sightedly like this? This really is a microcosm of a larger social trend, which is conflict-driven media. Things meant to trigger, annoy some pocket of the population and to produce a backlash. That'll get you engagement. That'll get one side very hyped up. It'll get the other side very jolly. And then you switch the tables. You do that on a different platform with a different account. You can get the reverse effect. To have this continue on and on as if it's some type of norm that we should accept is absurd. And once again, coming from the White House account, this is not even the only example of an institution succumbing to weird social media pressures, to the call to beef, to the call to be petty. I truly expected much more honor, grace, and dignity to be shown from these institutional organizations, but perhaps that was too much to ask for. Social media does seem to have a corrupting force here. You can land wherever you want on that student loan forgiveness debate and still recognize that leveraging accounts that the public should be all in unison when it comes to trusting to produce battlefields is a bad idea. And even if you are trying to provide a case for this being acceptable, I guarantee you won't find it so if the opposite party ends up in power and uses these tools to annoy you. It's simply not a healthy recipe for a society that has differing viewpoints. Now, sticking with this political trend, at the individual level, we have politicians who seem to be doing nothing else rather than tweeting all day. They're spending way too much time on social media, being petty, and fighting each other, putting on a grand display, a grand show. And it really makes me wonder if they have time to be investing all of these hours into concocting an online beef, perhaps they should reevaluate what's on their daily agenda. I also believe they should reevaluate their approach. Even though the Twitter mobs might feed you likes and retweets and engagement, is it a good thing for our top politicians to be acting so combative, childish, and frankly stupid online? And here, there was no shortage of example from anywhere around the world and from any political leaning. On the American right, you have people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, I believe is her name. Idiocy streaming out of that Twitter account at all times a day. On the left, there is no shortage either. And in Canada, I'm sure you can find apt examples too. What's happening here is there is sort of pandering to an audience base. But at what cost? At the cost of your legitimacy and your standing in the public eye. Then at the company/organizational level, there are crazy examples there too. One recent one that comes to mind is with the podcast movement. This is so interesting to have similar trends capturing business buzz manifesting in other ways. So for the politicians and the institutions, the social media influence is making them more combative, more eager to fight, more toxic, more hostile. On the business front, I've noticed they're becoming more docile, easy targets to bully and push around. So let me just read you a couple tweets that they put out. If you're not familiar with the situation, the podcast movement hosted a conference for podcasters. And at that conference, the Daily Wire had a booth. And this was all approved by the company. They paid the fee to show up and everything was good. Now, if you didn't know, the Daily Wire is owned or co-owned by Ben Shapiro, a prominent figure on the American conservative right. Not an alt-right idiot, a moderate conservative in my opinion. He has the standard conservative viewpoints. Now, when he showed up to his company's booth, there are a couple people on Twitter who felt triggered by that, and they complained. And because of this, the podcast movement just bowed their head. Should they have done that? It's debatable, but read this or listen to this series of tweets here. They say, "Hi folks, we owe you an apology before sessions kick off for the day. Yesterday afternoon, Ben Shapiro briefly visited the PM22 Expo area near the Daily Wire booth." And why I'm holding back chuckles here is because they're acting like Ben Shapiro is the boogeyman. If you know what he looks like, and if you listen to him, that really is just an insane way to paint him, truly. He may be one of the least menacing people out there, and he's very fond of debate and conversation. He's not here to terrorize people. So the tweet goes on to say, "Though he was not registered or expected, we take full responsibility for the harm done by his presence." Oh yes, the harm done by his presence. Such an interesting term. Then they go on to say there's no way around it. "We agreed to sell the Daily Wire a first-time booth based on the company's large presence in podcasting. The weight of that decision is now painfully clear." Oh, so dramatic. Ben Shapiro is a co-founder, a drop-in, however unlikely, and it should have been considered a possibility. Those of you who call this unacceptable are right. In 9 wonderful years growing and celebrating this medium, PM, that's the podcast movement, has made mistakes. The pain caused by this one will always stick with us. We promise that sponsors will be more carefully considered moving forward. How embarrassing. How deranged of a response is this? So Ben Shapiro showed up to a company booth that he purchased from the podcast movement, took some pictures with fans, and that results in you saying that the pain of this mistake will last forever? That this is unacceptable? Spare me. Pure foolishness. You knew who you were talking to when you signed the sponsorship agreement. And further, this type of reaction for Ben Shapiro is insanity. You may disagree with the man, but to try and deplatform him, to say he's not welcome because of his viewpoints, that's not tolerant. In fact, it's not even diverse. You only want those who you agree with at these type of conferences. The hypocrisy is great here. And at the business level, this type of cowardice to not stand firm in your decision making is just pitiful. I pick these examples because they illustrate the balance beam that we're walking on. On one hand, you have accounts who are becoming too outlandish, too confident, and far too combative. This is accounts like institutions and politicians and individuals. Then, at the business level, you have a group of accounts who are so scared to piss off one person that they're making corporate decisions based on a couple of tweets for people who don't even represent the entire attendance of the event. There's always going to be pissed off people about something. The question is it a valid concern or not? But these companies are falling victim to perhaps overestimating the impacts of a couple angry people with a couple angry tweets. And they're too afraid to counter that. Pure insanity, and this is where public discourse is heading. Twitter is an important space. Social media has grown to occupy such a large place in the public perception. And it is deranging us, and we can see that through the evolution of behavior on the platform. Where this is going to lead in the future, I'm not sure. But I'm definitely worried based on what I'm seeing here. Now, on this topic, I would love to hear your thoughts. And with that, it does bring us to the end of our conversation for today. If you enjoyed the material, be sure to leave a review and share. That'll help us grow. And you can find me online at perryplatform.org and on social media at perryplatform. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you soon.